Welcome to the Prepped and Polished podcast, the podcast that empowers you to take control of your education, featuring weekly interviews with influencers in the world of education, as well as tutoring tips, lessons, and updates. And now, here's your host, Alexis Avila.
And welcome back to the Prepped and Polished podcast. Alexis Avila, your host. This is episode 198. You can join our Prepped and Polished podcast community. Just go to preppedandpolished.com. And or you can go to our Facebook or Twitter group. Just type in Prepped and Polished. Have a question or reaction during or after this podcast. If you go to preppedandpolished.com, a chat box will appear, and you can just type your question in there, and somebody will get back to you right away. Let's get to today's guest. Today on episode 198, I bring back Seth Perler, a well-known, nationally known educator, teen coach, executive function coach. Seth has been a teacher for over a dozen years, has a bachelor's in education, a master's in gifted ed, has worked with teens with substance issues for 15 years, taught on a Navajo reservation, and he gives the best tips for students struggling with executive function. On today's episode, Seth talks about tips to get disorganized students better organized in school and in life. So let's get right to it. You're going to learn a lot today. Seth Perler is back. Thanks so much for coming back on the Prepped and Polished podcast. How are you doing today?
Great. I'm excited to be here again.
Great. So just remind the audience again briefly of your background and how you eventually became a teen coach working with students with executive function challenges.
Great. So my background was, really briefly, I was a struggling student myself. I almost failed out of high school. I failed out of college. I dropped out of a second college before I failed out. I felt like a failure. My progress reports in first grade started saying, daydreams, doesn't pay attention, doesn't try hard enough, yada, yada, yada. That happened every single year until I stopped getting progress reports, which was in ninth grade. And that's when I started getting, the midterm grades, and I started getting all my Fs and stuff in the mail differently. And anyhow, yeah, so that was my initial background. What makes me actually good at what I do is I really feel what my students are going through. So basically after that, I turned my life around and really started doing things differently. And I got a job working with kids by accident, started working with kids and fell in love with it and decided to become a teacher, became a teacher for 12 years, got a master's in gifted and talented education, taught math, science, social studies, reading, writing, taught 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 3rd grade, taught special ed, taught gifted, taught typical kids. So this wide range of kids. And throughout that time, I really became frustrated with seeing kids falling through the cracks and struggling and really feeling like that wasn't really necessary. Like we could do things differently and that there was a lot of shame that was going on with these kids. So eventually after 12 years of it, my life is dedicated to serving kids, but I really wanted to do it in a different capacity where I felt like I could serve more powerfully. So I left teaching, started SethPerler.com and Shine On Educational Solutions, which is my business, and became an executive function coach before there was really any such thing as an executive function coach, and specialized really mostly in 2E kids. So kids who are gifted and talented, but also have some sort of learning disability like autism, Asperger's, dyslexia, ADHD, or what have you.
Amazing.
So I like complicated human beings who struggle, and I like helping them figure out how to navigate this complicated world of education so that they can eventually have a great future. I'm not really concerned about grades or test scores or things like that. I'm concerned about they're a byproduct, but that's not the angle I'm taking. I'm taking, let's look at how do I get them to have a great future, and they do have to be able to execute.
That's amazing. So tell us about your website, SethPerler.com, and the types of services you provide for teens, for kids.
Cool. I'll do the screen share here. We're playing around with Zoom today. This is my site here, SethPerler.com. And basically, this is my hub. This is where I do everything. This is where I have a giveaway for parents and teachers. I have a lot of teachers who follow me, and here's the blog here. And every Sunday, I put out a new blog. I was just on Education on Fire podcast last week, homeschool and executive function. And then in the blog, each week, I make a YouTube video. And I go in depth in teaching about something that usually a parent problem, but basically that's my hub of where I put my message out to the world.
Nice. Is Education on Fire a daily podcast like Entrepreneur?
I don't think he is. And I think he has 3 different podcasts in his little thing. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's talk about disorganized students today. So what does a disorganized student look like? Are there different types of disorganization? Kids?
That's a great question right there. Are there different types of disorganization? Let me mention that first. Different types of organization, in my mind, the way I think about it is in terms of practically speaking about these kids, we have students who have disorganized thoughts. We have students who have disorganized environments, bedrooms, desks, closets, stuff like that. And then we have students who have disorganized backpacks, papers, and folders. So that's basically what you're looking at. If your child's backpack, papers, folders, school materials are disorganized, that's one broad category you can look at attacking. Their bedroom, their environment, their stuff, and then their thoughts, their mind, is that disorganized? So to me, that's kind of what I'm looking at when I'm looking at a disorganized student. My brain likes big categories.
Okay, gotcha. And do you find that disorganized students also have disorganized parents, or is there no real correlation between the two?
Sometimes there is. So Sometimes parents will say, yeah, my child's just like me, and the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And sometimes it really depends on the family. Sometimes I'll have a 2-parent family where the kid is exactly like one parent. Sometimes both parents are very structured and very highly organized. And those are the families that are really baffled by their child. They don't get it. And they're like, why? That's where the words lazy come in, unmotivated, that they're not trying hard enough. They just need to work harder. They just need to spend. And it's so obvious to them because they're good at execution and they're good at organization. So sometimes I get the 2 parents who are both highly organized. Sometimes both are not. And sometimes it's one or the other. So it just varies. Yeah.
Sure. And how much does attitude come into play when dealing with disorganized kids, trying to get them organized? If they start with a bad attitude, how do you kind of turn it around?
Yeah, well, I guess that's a great question. Now, I'm not the parent, so if the parent's working with a child, it's very different than me working with a child. But the number one most important thing for me to do when I'm working with a child is build rapport and build trust and let them know that I actually care about that human being. And when they know that, then I can start pushing them beyond their comfort zone so that they can do the things they don't feel like doing. In this case, getting organized. I do. So first of all, there's building the trust in the relationship. The relationship is everything as far as I'm concerned. So if they have a bad attitude, it's about relationship. It's not about me saying, you need to change your attitude. You have a bad attitude. Why don't you just see it this way? I don't lecture them. I don't logic them. I don't reason with them. I communicate with them and I say, oh, what's that about? Tell me more about that. Where does that come from? Why do you think that? Do you really believe that? Do you believe that 24/7? And I really challenge them on the attitude. But what I'm more interested in than the attitude is the action. So what I want to do is sort of trick them or manipulate them into getting organized and doing what they need to do by taking very tiny baby steps with it, by doing what's called scaffolding. So we start very small. And we build on that by doing it consistently and persistently throughout a semester. This isn't a one-time overhaul your backpack and your papers and it's done and have a lecture and now you got it. This is building a habit. So a lot of times it's just walking them through that and then afterwards saying, how was that for you? Before you really were resistant to it, you didn't want to do it, blah, blah. How was that for you? How bad was it? How long did it take us? They're not aware of time usually, so I use timers a lot. How long did it take us? You thought it would take this long. It took this long. Usually it's way longer than they think because they usually underestimate the amount of time and energy that's required to get things done. If they start reaching their threshold, and I see that, and this has to do with attitude too, and I can tell that they're getting burnout, I will push them a little bit past that comfort zone, and then I'll say, look, we're going to stop in 5 minutes. I can see you're getting anxious or whatever. We're going to be done. Let's do one more thing. Is that cool with you? And I get the buy-in, what's called buy-in and ownership. And if I get some buy-in and ownership, they say, yeah, let's do one more, then we do it. If they say, no, I'm sick of it, I say, cool, let's stop. We're done. Okay. And look at what you did. You did a fantastic job. We did this. I'm reflecting back to them because they're also not very introspective and not very reflective. The kids that I work with executive function difficulties. difficulties. So I reflect back to them, look at what you did. This is awesome. You did this, 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 and this. I want them to become aware of it because they don't have that awareness.
Wow. What's an approach that you definitely don't want to take when you see maybe other people doing it, other coaches doing it wrong when trying to get your disorganized kid organized?
Well, there's a fine balance between not doing enough for them and doing too much for them.
Okay.
So that's a very gray area. And that goes back to the relationship. So sometimes coaches or parents are not contemplating the relationship first. That is everything, and the emotional stuff first. If I see a child and we pull something out and they have an emotional reaction, or they go like this, or they make a face or something, I stop and I say, whoa, I just noticed you. So this is called mirroring. I say, whoa, I just noticed you did this. What's that about? And I explore what's behind it. I explore what's underneath the iceberg. So you got the iceberg. The tip of the iceberg is what we see on the surface, but there's all this stuff underneath. And then I might say, what's that about? You just made this face. They might say, oh, I hate this teacher. This teacher hates me. They're unfair to me. They always do this. It's a waste of my time. So that's a mistake that people make, I think, is like not addressing that stuff. You get a lot further. It seems like you're getting off course, but you're not. You get a lot further when we address these emotional things and the underneath the iceberg stuff. So, and then like I said, there's the gray, there's the, are you doing too much for them and enabling them and not helping them because you're doing too much? And are you not doing, what's the opposite? Are you doing too much for them, or are you not doing and letting them do enough? So there's that space where I want to push them beyond their comfort zone, but before their threshold. Once you pass the threshold, you've lost them. I'm going to lose trust with them. They're not going to want to work with me.
Wow.
They're not going to allow me to push them. But I do have to push them past their comfort zone, because if I don't push them past their comfort zone, they're not going to see what they're made of. They're not going to build resilience and grit. But I tell them that too. I say, okay, this is going to be uncomfortable. You're not going to want to do this. We're going to overhaul everything in your backpack. If you get sick of it, I'm not going to push you past your threshold. We'll stop, but let's see what we can do. And, so I want to push them. I want them to be uncomfortable because that's where the growth is, but not too far that I lose them. And I think a lot of times people lose them. And then I get parents who hire me who say, yeah, they didn't, I guess the main complaint would be they didn't like the last coach, or they didn't like the last tutor, or they hated the last tutor, or they hated the last coach, or they felt like the coach didn't like them. So again, it's all about relationship, and you have to push them and not push them past the comfort zone, not past the threshold, and work in that area and be patient, because parents want to see it go where it needs to go immediately. That's not reality. Even as adults, we don't change that fast. If we want to change our weight or our exercise or habits as adults, it's incredibly difficult for us to change. How are we going to get a kid to change that fast? It's small, persistent baby steps. That's where my ability to help them change comes from baby steps.
Amazing. So what are some of your best tips to get a disorganized student more organized? And what is the Q folder?
Cool. You might have to remind me about the Q folder question.
So you're talking about in one of your videos.
No, I mean, let me address the first one.
Yeah, that's a loaded one.
So the first one was, my brain has to stay on a track. So the first question was what?
Just a general, what are some of your just best tips to get a disorganized student more organized?
Cool. So we have those three areas again. We have their environment, their bedroom, stuff like that. We have the backpack and the school materials, and we have the mind. So let's talk about the bedroom, that area first. I am a huge believer in decluttering, minimizing, essentialism, downsizing, getting rid of stuff you don't need. I knew this very, very wealthy man many years ago who had a house in Indiana with 4 wings on it. He actually had a guy who lived in a separate house on his property to maintain it. And one day he said to me, the more stuff you have, the more stuff you have to maintain. He had a 6-car garage, giant house, blah, blah. The more stuff you have, the more stuff you have to maintain. Same thing with these kids. The more stuff they have, the more stuff they have to maintain. I used to collect guitars. We were talking about that earlier. The most I ever had I've had well over 100. The most I had at one time was 12. I had to change the strings all the time, maintain them all the time. Now I have one awesome electric, one awesome acoustic, and one ukulele. So it is downsizing, and is simplifying. It is really seeing what do you need. So stuff in and of itself isn't bad, but for your child's bedroom and their environment, get rid of all the clothes that they don't wear or don't fit. Get rid of all the books that they don't read anymore. Get rid of all the toys they don't play. Now, obviously, you want buy-in and ownership with them and hopefully going through this process. But I do this with my clients. We downsize their environment. We get the parents involved. We figure out what do you need, because the more stuff they have, the more stuff they have to maintain. But they're not organized people. So, but they have all this stuff, and some of them are very attached to it. So that's number one. Is I'm a huge believer in downsizing. Number two, and this also has to do with the bedroom. This will transfer to the backpack too. The bedroom and their environments, their playrooms, their hobby rooms, their electronics areas, their gaming areas, whatever, is having homes for things. So when I say homes for things, this is my real life inbox. Everything I have to deal with is in this box as far as papers. So this is where I keep my memory sticks and sticky notes in here, and a couple business cards. So basically, homes for things that are labeled. Like my kids can't find their chargers. They can't find their phones. They can't find their wallets. They can't find their gift cards. They can't find their school ID. They can't find their homework. Homes for things that are labeled. Visual. They have to be able to see it. So that's one thing that's sort of more environmental. Now we move on to the backpack. So in order to organize the kid with their backpack, what I do when I first started working with a student, let's take a good example, which would be I start working with a student mid-semester. Let's say it's mid-spring semester, it's March. I start working with a student. The first thing I'm going to do is an overhaul of their materials. I need them to get everything to me, whether it's at my office, whether it's at their home, wherever, or a coffee shop, wherever I'm working with them. I need everything. I need, if they have a locker, and I always say, bring everything, bring the gum wrappers. I don't care. Bring the broken pencils, get it. I put it in a black plastic bag and get it to me. I want every book, every folder, every paper, every material. I want to get it all on a table or all on the floor and make sense of their stuff. If they have a desk at school and not a locker, I want that. If they keep it all in their backpack, which a lot of my disorganized students keep everything in their backpack because they actually they've gotten in so much trouble before for not having something that they carry a 50-pound backpack everywhere with them. That's actually not a bad compensatory strategy, but it's certainly not the best dealing with the underlying issue of organization. But we start with everything. And then we go through every paper, everything. We start to organize things. We start to color code folders. We start to create systems. These kids are not systems thinkers. They don't have homes for things. But in this case, with a school folder, this is actually another true story. This is my guitar folder. You can notice it used to be something else, but now it is for guitar. And I use a massive, this is real, Sharpie to label my students' stuff, unless they're middle schoolers and they're highly sensitive and they don't want to stand out, which that's another issue you might have to deal with. But large labels. I will never put anything that's not guitar stuff in here because this is so obnoxious. But that's what I'm doing with my students. We get it. This is your math folder. This is red. This is your science. This is green, whatever. But we need homes for things, homes for supplies. What they tend to do.
Where do you keep your guitar folder? Like where?
Well, here are my guitars. My amplifier is on this side of the room, so it's right on my desk. It has to be in a logical place. Now, last week I was out playing with people, but I knew where this was, so I could take it to the people I was playing music with. So you have to have logical places. And these kids stick their math in their science folder. They stick it in their pockets. They fold it up. They stick it anywhere. The teacher says, pull out your notebook. They pull out any notebook. They say, all right, we're going to take notes in science. They pull out their social studies notebook and open to any page. They have no idea where those notes are. So these kids really, I start with getting everything so I can get a big picture of their organization. Then I help them create the systems or the homes to manage these things. But then I have to consistently and persistently continue to help them overhaul these systems throughout the semester, because again, just doing it once does not work. These kids have to build a habit. They have to build a routine. I do what's called a Sunday night overhaul. It's on my website in the course that I send out for free. But I do Sunday night overhauls with all my students. We go through everything, we retighten it up. It's way easier after the first time, but they are not good at maintaining. So they have to have a framework for maintenance, and that's what I do on Sunday nights is we redo, organize their folders, their papers, their planners, their online portals. So you can think of that as sort of organization, but we go through all the systems.
Amazing, man. So you did mention the Q folder, which I thought was pretty cool in your video. And, okay. And this is a game changer for getting disorganized students better organized.
Yeah. So this is one method of simplification. So earlier when I was talking about the bedroom, I was talking about downsizing. Same thing with the backpack. I do not want my students carrying everything with them. They don't need all their papers. If it's trash, get rid of it. They often say, well, I might need this to study for a test. 99% of the time they don't, because this teacher will give a study guide anyhow. So with a Q folder, like this is a Q essentially for guitar stuff. What I do with a Q folder with a student, it's Q-U-E-U-E. So Q means like a line, like it's what I do with the Q. I put a big giant Q on the folder. And that means that we just keep, and usually I make it red because that's an alert color, like a stop sign. And the Q is everything living goes in that folder. So they might have a math folder, science folder, social studies, language arts folder, French folder, miscellaneous folder, whatever. And then they have the Q. The Q is for everything living or everything that's awake or everything that's current, everything that's going on. So the Q, if your teacher gives you a homework sheet and says, this is due tomorrow, goes in the Q. If another teacher says, here's a rubric for a paper that's due in 2 weeks, it goes in the queue, even if it's a different class. If you finish your homework, it goes back in the queue until it gets turned in. If you have a permission slip that needs to be signed, it goes in the queue. After it's signed, it goes back in the queue. It's a catch-all for everything current. It is one centralized, simplified place that's red and obnoxiously labeled with their name in the letter Q that they know this is where. Now, I don't do this with all students, but with a good handful of students, we do this. It's just easy. If they're super disorganized, look, kid, if you don't know, if you have to do something with it, just put it in this queue. Don't worry about getting it in the right folder. Just get it in this one so that you know everything is there that has to, this is my queue, but mine is an inbox. But basically, this is everything that has to be dealt with for me, whether it's a bill, whether it's instruction manual I have on top that I want to read, whatever, that is my queue. I don't care what category it is. It has to be dealt with. And that's what the queue is. Beautiful, simple idea that works well for a lot of kids.
And that basket, do you pick those specific baskets on purpose, or did you just happen to come across a thick?
Yeah, this particular one, I like the size. I like that it fits 8.5 by 11.
Yeah, sure. It's got holes too.
It's got holes. I would rather it not have holes because I don't like to see the clutter, even though my background may look cluttered. My area actually is not. Now, don't get me wrong, too. I work very hard to pretend I'm organized. I am not a naturally organized person, but I work 10 times harder than everybody else to be somewhat organized. But that is a lifesaver for me. That is my cue. Yeah.
Nice. So Seth, how do we best get in touch with you and work with you? Do you work online with students? That's how you work?
I live in Boulder, Colorado. I work live and online. My website is sethperler.com. I have a free blog. My practice is generally full online and live. So I honestly can't handle any more clients like that. But I also have an online course called Upgrade Your Grades, UGYG, which is a semester-long, in-depth, fantastic course. That's a paid course, but I also have tons of free content that is really in-depth. I go, just like on this interview, I go into tons of solutions of what works. I do not look at things conventionally. But anyhow, check out my course, UGYG, the free blog, and you can contact me if you want. I just am usually full with clients, but I do talks as well, and I travel and speak to schools and parent groups and stuff like that.
And any advice for teens listening to us today, getting ready to cross that bridge?
Yeah, for teens that are listening today, here's what I want to tell you. Do not give up. Your number one biggest problem you will ever have is your own resistance. Your own resistance to self-starting, to using a planner, to getting organized, to taking steps, to asking for help, to being forthcoming with your parents, to communicating with teachers. Hey, I'm struggling. Your own resistance is the number one problem. And the key to the resistance, there's no magic bullet. There's nothing magical about this. The key to overcoming the resistance is baby steps. Take a small step. Move a millimeter, and you move many, many, many millimeters, and you've made progress. Do not give up. Take the tiniest step. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You have to know that it's all about the small steps. You want to have a happy and successful future. Even though you may not agree with everything that's going on in school, or you may have teachers that you don't like, or classes you don't like, or have to do things or jump through hoops that you don't even believe in and you don't even know why they're important, doesn't matter. In order for you to achieve any goal you want to have in life, to have a great, happy, and successful and healthy future, you have to be able to do things you don't like. I'm not saying to do things that are incongruent with who you are, or things that are bad for you, or things like that, but you will have to do things that are uncomfortable, like getting organized and taking steps and writing papers and studying and doing things that you don't feel like doing. Take small steps anyway. Push yourself beyond your comfort zone. Get up to that threshold. Don't pass the threshold. Take care of yourself. Do self-care, but push yourself past your comfort zone consistently all the time. Baby steps, baby steps, baby steps. That is what's going to get you to achieve your goals in life, is that grit, that resilience, that being able to break through your own resistance so that you can achieve your goals.
Great. Thanks, Seth, for coming back on the show. Appreciate your time. And
so welcome.
You're so back.
Thanks for having me.
Perfect. And this wraps up our show. This was episode 198 with teen coach Seth Perler. Episode 199 is coming soon. It will be our next tutoring tips episode. And if you want another related conversation episode to today's episode, go back to my first podcast with Seth Perler. That was episode 162 on strengthening your executive function skills. To access our podcast, you can do that two ways. You can go to preppedandpolished.com/podcast. You can listen to all our episodes, or you can go to soundcloud.com/preppedandpolished. Thank you for joining us on the Prepped and Polished podcast. Now go out there and take control of your education.
You've been listening to the Prepped and Polished podcast. For more information, check out preppedandpolished.com. Also, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening. Class dismissed.